what do you think about the current state of debt in the country? There's a lot of talk about piling up student debt and lots of other forms of debt. Some people say that actually it's completely within the government's power to forgive a lot of that debt. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's within the government's power to do a lot of things. I think that's one of them. The question isn't whether it's in the government's power to do something. A lot of times, the question is whether it's a good idea or whether it would be better for people, whether it would help the economy, that kind of thing.
Right.
In terms of debt in general, I think we do have a problem in our economy where So might be a little bit of a digression, but in order for the economy to function properly, it needs to be producing goods and services for people. That means that goods and services need to be flowing out of the productive economy toward consumers. But anytime, the goods and services are flowing in one direction, money is flowing in the other direction. So that means in order for the economy to function, money has to be flowing from consumers into the productive economy. So goods and services go one way and money goes the other way. So the question is, what's the source of that money? And like you and I talk about basic income a lot, and we say like, oh, well, basic income can be the source of consumer spending money, like in aggregate. Obviously, consumers get some money from income from jobs and that kind of stuff. But in total, you still need this net flow of money going into the productive economy and goods and services flowing out of the productive economy. So then the question is, if you don't have a basic income, how are you funding consumer spending? And the way we typically make up for that shortfall is that we stimulate the amount of debt in the private sector. So firms and people are borrowing in order to be able to spend more. Firms are borrowing in order to be able to hire people so that people can spend more, that kind of thing. And this can become more unstable over time. More debts start to depend on other debts. So I owe money to you and I can't pay you until I get my money back from Bob. And then like layers of that accumulate, it gets more brittle and then it collapses like we saw in 2008. For student debt in particular, there are some specific issues with student debt that are unique to that and don't necessarily relate to the overall debt situation in the economy. But there's some similarities too. I would probably object to the idea that, we should be sending everyone to college. I think everyone should have a world-class education. I think we have the resources to provide everyone a world-class education. I don't think college is the most efficient way to do that. And moreover, I would probably say that, education is hugely important. We want to educate people, provide them with, intellectual resources, that kind of thing. I don't think the purpose of education, if we want to use it to its full effect, is to just prepare people for jobs. So there's kind of like a lot of things that we're assuming when it comes to college. So we're assuming that everybody needs jobs. We're assuming that everybody needs to go to college to get a job. And then we're saying, okay, we're going to put facilities in place to ensure that people can borrow whatever money it takes to go to college. And then, of course, if the consumer, the customer, the student has a fairly unlimited, unconstrained amount of money to spend on tuition, that creates an incentive for tuitions to be higher, because colleges are not competing on price. They want to compete for the best students, and the best students don't care about price. They care about how awesome the college is. So they invest in things that actually make it more expensive in order to attract the students they want. And you got this kind of cycle there.
Right. So it's important to know that college itself does not necessarily equal education. That there's other ways in which we can talk about providing a world-class education to people besides putting them into prestigious universities.
Yes, that's exactly right. So in terms of forgiving student debt, I mean, I think the student debt thing is a mistake, that we probably shouldn't have been giving all these loans to students in the first place, because college is not this special thing that we need to provide for. And if it was, maybe just giving them the money instead of putting it in the form of a loan would have been less problematic. So, I think we could forgive student debt. I think there's like some moral issues, like rich people are the ones who go to college. So you're giving a benefit to people who had the privilege to go to college, and there are people who couldn't afford to go to blah, 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 all of that. The question is whether we'd be better off going into the future. I certainly think if we start forgiving student debt, then we can't continue with the current system. It's not like, oh, we just press the reset button and now we keep going, because now you have a situation where people are taking on student debt with the hope that it'll be forgiven because it was forgiven in the past. So you have that kind of like moral hazard there, or whatever you want to call it. So I think, forgiving the student debt could be a good thing, but I'd like to see it as part of rethinking how we think about education and how we think about funding education.
You and I probably agree that excessive debt in general in the current system is almost entirely a function of an inadequate money source. And if you just clear away the debt structure itself, well, if you haven't cleared away the problems with the flow of money to people, then that debt structure may reaccumulate.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, we see this not just with, student loans and that issue, but we see it with the business cycle, right? Consumers need money in order to be able to buy things. So the Fed uses expansionary monetary policy to stimulate the private financial sector. I would say they're overstimulating the private financial sector. This, it creates jobs. It funds businesses. It does, in some ways get money to consumers, not necessarily in the ideal distribution, but it does help fuel that. But it also increases the amount of private debt accumulation in the economy as a whole. And you get these asset bubbles like we saw with the housing market. And, there's other asset bubbles too. Then it eventually collapses, and then we kind of do it all over again. We are using monetary policy to prop up consumer spending. If we're funding consumer spending directly through a basic income, we don't need to do that anymore. If you think about what the business cycle is and what recessions are, we're in a recession if the economy is producing less, like if GDP is going down, that kind of stuff. But if you're funding consumer spending in a stable way, then people are going to keep buying the same amount of stuff. You're not going to have recessions anymore. So if you get a basic income to a high enough level, it allows us to rein in the private financial sector, have a stable financial sector that is not, depending on asset bubbles and derivatives and all of that. And you're not going to have recessions anymore that are caused by problems in financial markets.
I think that's right. This was a good digression. Let's bring it back.